Chapter 20 is now going to sort of continue to explore this whole idea of attachment to God or separation from God. We're not going to focus on those things specifically just yet, but this is what we're setting up. Because the last 2 chapters, after we went through the whole beginning of Tanya, of talking about what our makeup is, and if the godly soul rules, the animal soul, we've got conflict going on between the two of them. We got to use our minds to control our hearts. Then we started this whole new part here with focusing on the original idea of this is not just near to you, but it's very near to you. So the first case the Alter Rebbe makes for that, why is it not just near to you, but very near to you, is because it's been inside of you all along. You were born with it, it's part of your inheritance, it's part of the makeup of your very DNA. So that's why it's not just near to you, it's something that you can theoretically access, but it's an actual part of you. We have to find it. We have to tap into it, but it's actual part of you. What is that? That's what we get to the whole hidden love. That's the Ava Misoteris that we're talking about. Very near to us, it's this place in Chachma, nothing can taint it. It's part of the DNA, it's always there. We have to know that it's there and then try to bring it out, try to make it manifest itself. Then this is proof now of how this is actually not just near to us, but very near, because again, it's part of us. 18 and 19 were explaining that, and also the end of 19 we wrapped up by saying it's not only love that's there, but it's fear that's in there also. That it's an inherent love and fear that's within there. Why are love and fear important? Avin, your love and fear are important because we know what they do for a mitzvah. They're going to be the wings in the mitzvah, etc. It gives more feeling to mitzvah. The experience in the mitzvah is going to be different. What we're putting into it's not just that. We're looking at the root of it. What does it do at its root is that love is a desire for connection. Fear is a dread of separation. I love someone so much, I want to connect with them. Because I love them so much, or because I have this great fear of someone, I don't want to be separated from them. I don't want to ruin what we've got. It's a couple of chapters that's going to get into this whole idea of Achdus Hashem. What does it mean that God's unity? Where does God come into all this sort of thing? And the reason why that's important is because we're trying to emphasize when you say you love God and you want to connect with Him, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? We say, oh, there's fear of God, I don't want to separate from Him. Well, what does that look like? What does connection look like? And what does separation look like? What leads to either one of these things? Also, what do we either do or refrain from doing to either make something happen or prevent something from happening? So if I want to connect to God, how do I do that? If I want to protect my connection with God, if I don't want to allow for any separation from God, what do I need to refrain from? We're not just saying do this and don't do this, we're actually going to explain it, because giving us this sort of appreciation for it should dictate our actions, because then we can truly understand what occurs. And not just saying do this or don't do this, or lightning strikes and you're going to make everyone happy when you do these sort of behaviors. The chapter starts off that. So we look at the 10 Commandments, and the first 2 of them, we have Anochi Hashem Elkecha Asher Tzicha Meretz Tzayim. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Lo Yecha Elohim Acher Al Panai. Don't have any other gods before me. The Alter Rebbe is saying the first 2 commandments contain the entire Torah. There have been sages like Saadia Gaon, I think, who proves how every single mitzvah is contained within the Aseret Dibros. They show how everything is really derivative, how everything comes from the same thing. The Alter Rebbe is going a step beyond that, not just between all the Aseret Dibros, but how every single mitzvah is contained within Anochi and within Lo Yelecha. It's also because when the Jewish people said, we want to hear the Torah from God, and Hashem got them the first 2 Dibros, we know, and then all of a sudden the people were like, never mind, this is too much for us. We can't just keep dying and then being resurrected. But they're all saying, like, no, they actually did hear the whole Torah from God. How did they hear the whole Torah from God? Because they heard the first 2 Dibros. Fine. Let's go back to the beginning for a second. We're laying the groundwork of what does it mean connection to God or separation from God. There is going to be a chapter about what does it mean to do a mitzvah. When you do a mitzvah, what actually happens? How is this connection? It's within these next couple of chapters that we're going to get to all this. And then the other question is, what does it mean separation? If you say, oh, we have a fear of separation from God, well, what does it mean separation? If I go to a certain mountain, do I separate from God? Or you're saying, no, if you transgress, it's a separation from God. That's what we're trying to figure out is what does this all mean? We have our assertion that says, God gave us a Torah, highlighted by the Aseret Dibros. The first 2 of the Dibros encompass the whole Torah. How can that be? There's 613 mitzvahs, the 7 rabbinic commandments, and all the offshoots that come from it. The first of the Dibros, Anochi Hashem Elkecha, that is affirmation of God's existence. It's not just saying, oh, I believe in God. All of that, it's all the desire for connection. By saying there is a God in the world, my love of God is going to drive me to connect to God. That means all the things that God wants me to do, I'm going to do them because that connects me to God. Same way you have a friend or your better friends go out of their way to do things that are more thoughtful, that they know you like specifically. The way that they'll celebrate your birthday or something like that. They do things specifically tailored for you. We're demonstrating our friendship through these things. And you can think of anything. Any kind of relationship where you specifically do because you know that it's something that they specifically like. This is something that they specifically go for. But this doesn't matter. It's the underlying expression behind it. It's the underlying thought behind it. Saying this is what you want, And because it's you, I'm going to do what you want. It doesn't even matter what you're asking me almost. That we're also going to get to eventually. But it doesn't even matter what you're asking me. But because I believe that you are God and my desire for connection to God, I'm going to do what God asks. Whether or not I understand it fully, but I know that this is what you want, so this is what I'm going to do. And each time I do what you want for me, I am now connecting to you. Now, all the prohibitive commandments, don't have any other gods before me, because I believe so much in you, and because I do not want to separate from you, I will not do what you don't want me to do. Again, if you're friends with someone and you do something they don't like, there's a little bit of a rift that occurs. There's a little bit of moment where you are defining yourself as a separate entity. I know you don't like this, but this is what I want to do right now. There's you, and then there's me. It doesn't mean, we're never friends anymore. We're not saying that. But there is a moment of separation that occurs. I am a separate entity. For good or for not good, this is what I want to do right now. So all the prohibitive commandments where God says don't do this, if someone does those, someone transgresses one of those, they're establishing themselves as a separate entity, saying there is God and then there's also me. There's what you want, but there's also what I want. As in whatever you want does not supersede. Whatever you want is not the ultimate. Even unintentionally, that's what's being said in a moment of transgression. From last chapter, we knew that a person, if it came to a point of ultimate separation from God, God forbid, denounce your Judaism, we know Mesiras Nefesh, the Ava Misateres, the hidden love is going to flare up in a moment of Mesiras Nefesh. It makes no sense for a person to just say, well, kill me then. But in that moment, there's something that overrides life itself. What overrides life itself? Our connection to God. I will not denounce it. That we set up at the end of last chapter. And specifically to say you don't have to be a tzaddik to reach this level. Even someone who is not a tzaddik, even someone who's on any level, they don't seem to be connected to Judaism at all, but in that moment, that flare-up is going to occur. That's an extreme case. What the Alter Rebbe wants to do now, in taking us through these chapters, is say we don't have to wait for the moment of what supersedes life itself. We don't have to wait for the moment where everything is on the line. Because we know we have the possibility within us for the moment when everything is on the line, let's remember that, draw it out, and rely on that for when things are not on the line. Also because if you truly understand what happens in a moment of mitzvah or transgression, it's much more impactful than we realize. Every moment of a mitzvah is incredibly impactful, and every moment of a transgression is severe, even if doesn't seem like such a big deal. So now we're going to get to all that. Well, this is something that's going to be set up soon. If a person has the moment of Mesiras Nefesh, it's because, no, I would never denounce my Judaism. I would never denounce connection to God. That's the moment of Mesiras Nefesh. People who seem to have no connection to Judaism, even in that moment, they do that. One thing that we're going to learn with transgression is that any time you do what God doesn't want, there's a moment of separation that occurs. And what he wants to drive home for us, which we're going to get to when we get to those chapters, they're not easy chapters to go through. Because Parshas Akev, the mitzvahs that person crushes under their heel because they say it's not so important. And the other was like, just because you think it's a small mitzvah, it doesn't mean that a separation didn't occur. And we know that in a moment of ultimate separation, we would never do that. But you have to understand that every transgression is a moment of separation. There is never a moment that we want to allow for separation to occur if you have this actual fear of God. / love of God is like, no, not even for a second. Because that's how severe separation from God is. Here, we're equating it, it's on the level of idolatry. It's on the level of saying there is another God, another powerful force that is not God. Well, it's not. This is what reality is. It's so much that we emphasize about, especially Chabad, that we focus so much more on the positive and on the love and the joy. But at the end of the day, we also have to understand what happens with transgression. I can just tell you a fire's warm and beautiful and it cooks, but I also have to tell you that a fire burns. And this is for your own protection, I'm telling you this. Not because I want to scare you in the sense of I don't want you having nightmares from it, but you should be afraid of touching fire in the sense that this can actually burn you. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So even though it's hard to speak about it, it's hard to swallow because you're like, this? Really? So I'm not so strict with whatever. It's really that bad, but like, yes. So I still have to let you know what happens. So this is what we're going to have to go through all this. We've set the stage now. This is the foundation. This is the base now for the next couple of chapters. Everything that's thou shalts all falls under the first of the set of Sedibros. Thou shalt not is the second set. Each time we fulfill a thou shalt, we are connecting to God. Each time we transgress on a thou shalt not, we are creating a separation from God. Now, what do you mean connecting, separating to God? What does it also mean? So first of all, you have to understand how God exists within the universe. Who am I connecting to? Who am I separating from? How does this happen? Now that we set the marker, the foundation, now let us explain what it means, Achdas Hashem in the world. Because if there was a chance that God didn't exist on this particular mountain, then you could go to this particular mountain and do whatever you wanted, because God's dominion, his providence doesn't apply to this mountain. That's not the way it occurs. God is everything. You cannot run and you cannot hide. It's not just he's everywhere. He is everything. He is actual everything. Not just is he actually everything, but he created an entire world, an entire existence, entire Milky Way galaxies, etc., 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 which we can't even fathom. We can't even reach them, let alone fathom them. Look what it takes just to get to the moon. How far have you even gone? Mars? Civilizations rise and fall, and we barely touch the moon. For us, we're like, this is everything. Not only is it not everything, but it's not even a blip on God's radar. So we have to understand the being that we're dealing with. There is nothing that exists that isn't him. The next chapter is going to round that out, but everything is a manifestation of God within creation. There is nowhere where you could go where he isn't, which means every time you do what he wants, you affirm that. Every time you do what he wants, you say, there is only God within creation. And every time you do what he doesn't want, it is an act of saying, maybe there's something else. Well, what else? If everything is God, there is nothing else. And again, not only that, but God, the entire creation that came about, he wasn't even affected by it. It's so crazy to think about. It didn't do anything to him. How is that possible? We can't run a mile without schwitzing or panting or whatever, or maybe feeling a little bit of a burn or something like that. We can't do anything without it somehow affecting us. And yet God created an entire universe. He's the same God. He didn't need us, and he brought us into being. And even after he brought us into being, he doesn't need us. Well, we'll get to that also. Nisava Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? We get into all that. And then you say, well, how's that possible? What do you mean, how's that possible? The only way you could understand how that's possible is to understand what does it mean that God spoke and the world came into being. So first of all, you're like, well, God spoke and the world came into being. Yeah, it seems impressive if God's capacities was only speak and magic occurs. Abracadabra, and God does that. That would be very impressive. But what you're doing is you're making a false measurement because you're looking at only this fact that God spoke and the world came into being, and you're looking at only within because we have this narrow-minded focus on our own, the world that we exist in. Do you even understand what God's capacity for speech is? So, well, let me explain. Look at yourself. We speak a lot. Look, I can tell you whenever I have to edit audio, a lot of words can be said in a short amount of time. But that is not impressive compared to your actual capacity for speech. I might say, oh wow, they made a great speech today, but I'm not like, wow, they spoke words! For a regular human, healthy, functioning human being, it's not so impressive that you spoke words. Why? Because your power of speech is so vast. We're not talking about what you actually said. We're talking about your actual capacity for speech. Because the fact that you spoke on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, what is that compared to your power of speech? The power that you have for speech, it's incredible. Any word you have in your mind can be spoken. And even a word that you don't even know what it is can be spoken. Because you could describe something and find a word for it. So your capacity for speech, it's immeasurable. And the author was like, wait, but don't stop there. Where does your power of speech? What does it get inspired from? Where does it get its words from? It gets its words from your thoughts. So if your power of speech is entirely immeasurable, imagine how vast the power of thought is, which is where all your thoughts and feelings take form. Because you could have a sense for something, whatever it is. Your head sends it to your heart sends it back to your thoughts. Well, it depends how long the process takes, but it could be an involuntary process until it goes back to your thought for you to say, okay, I have a sense for something. What am I going to do about it now? Why do I love this thing? What am I going to do about the love of this thing? Etc. That's thought. In thought is where thoughts, feelings actually take a form. What is the form? They take words. That's where language actually comes into being. But now there's a step before that. That's kind of like your gut, which is really the 10 soul powers. Your initial flash of an idea. Before that idea gets words. Your epiphany, but you don't know what that is yet. Why do I have a drive for something? You don't have a word for it yet. You have to think about it to understand, why am I driven towards something? Or why do I have this initial gut reaction of love or fear or anger or whatever towards something? Withholding, withdrawing, or anything. Why do I have that? So now we're talking about that. That's even before that. We're already at numbers that we can't even imagine about how immeasurable all these things are. And then going even before that is where the actual essence of the soul powers the intellect and emotions, which powers the thought, which powers the speech, which powers the words that you say. So we're talking about something that's so vast and incomprehensible. Now do you understand how you can't say, oh, but God spoke when worlds came into being, so it's a big deal? Like, no, it isn't. Not because the world isn't a big deal, but as far as God's powers are concerned, it's not a big deal. God could do these things and it does not affect him because you're measuring God's words that created a world. Do you even understand what capacities we're speaking about when we talk about what God's powers are? Look at you yourself. You don't make a big deal out of every single word you say. Then the kids start speaking, little toddlers. You video every single word they say. It doesn't matter what they're saying. You're like, say it again. Da 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 da. 400 times. Then someone else walks into them. Oh, look, they said da 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 da. We don't do that for adults. So that's what it's saying with that. And you have violation, and all that kind of stuff. Understand what we're speaking with. It's not just, oh, God's here, there, and everywhere. That's where he can be found. Yeah, but God is everything. How can it be? God created a world is separate from him. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The speech is not separate from God. God does not separate from speech itself, which also we're going to get to. We're using our own human comprehension to say, well, it's a big deal when you say things. For God, no, it isn't. Even for ourselves, no, it isn't. But especially for God, no, it isn't. It's comparing 1 to infinity, but for God, there's no numbers for that. For us, it's 1 to infinity. One word to the actual essence of your soul. It's comparing 1 to infinity. For God, there's no number. It goes way beyond that. Then it also ends off with, unlike a craftsman who, when they create something, they can walk away from it because they're creating a yesh miyesh, something from a something. So you take wood and you make a table out of it, you can walk away from the table. You don't have to sustain it. But God created a world yesh miyayin, which is why God has constantly sustained it. That's why forever, O Lord, your word stands firm in the heavens. Until you have Chassidus, until you have the Baal Shem Tov, it was always God's word is eternal. Forever, your word stands firm in the heavens. And the Baal Shem Tov is like, it's not just your word stand firm in the heavens. God's actual words keep the heavens in existence. There's actually a literal interpretation, which is actually a deeper Hasidic interpretation of it. It's not just, oh, your words are eternal, but your words actually keep the world in existence. What we've set up here with this chapter are two things. One is that the entire Torah, love and fear, is totally encompassed by and demonstrated by the first two commandments. One is an affirmation of God, and one would be a denial of God's absoluteness. It would be a denial of Achdus Hashem. So you could even say the first one is Achdus Hashem, the second one would be a denial of the Achdus of Hashem. That there is something that's not only God. That's the first thing. The other thing is that we have to explain how does God exist in the world. Because again, this is a setup for what does it mean to connect with Him and what does it mean to try to separate from Him. That's basically chapter 20.